under Rule 37 to the representative of Syria.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, President. Some have evoked chemical weapons in Syria today, but this is false information that is being peddled, because there are no more chemical weapons in Syria, and there haven't been since Ms. Sigrid Kaag announced here before the Security Council in 2014 that such was the case. In 2014, she said categorically here, there are no more chemical weapons in Syria. Today, Ms. Nakamitsu said in her briefing that she hailed the destruction of the 27 chemical weapon production facilities in Syria, the complete destruction thereof, and she also hailed the signature of the tripartite agreement with UN Ops. It seems that some colleagues here didn't listen carefully and closely to the High Representative's briefings, those same somewhat deaf members who continue to insist here in this chamber that they are living in a live version of Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot, and Godot is never going to turn up. The threats being wielded will have no impact, let me assure you of that. Threats will fall on stony ground here. We are diplomats, and even threats from presidents will not cause us to waver from our task, which is to find diplomatic solutions, to prevent crises, to prevent wars, and to find solutions to international crises. That is our role as diplomats, not to issue threats. The Security Council is not a battleground. This is not a space for pursuing war. The Security Council has made several missteps in the past in Iraq and Libya, and we should learn from these mistakes. It is high time that we learned that lesson. President, my delegation and other delegations, when we first caught sight of the program of work for this month of September, we were convinced that certain permanent members do not want the Security Council to live up to its chief responsibility, that of maintaining international peace and security. Rather, these members are prepared to stop at nothing to exploit the Security Council and the working instruments of the Security Council and the United Nations to pursue their own political ends for political warfare for their own benefit and to the detriment of international peace and security. We see that there are governments in certain countries, including the governments of permanent members of the Security Council, who dodge and shirk their responsibilities. They are politically, morally, and legally speaking unable to preserve international peace and security. They cannot live up to that solemn responsibility. In other words, those who hold and conceal the nuclear, chemical, and biological weapon arsenal of Israel, those who use pretext to maintain their own chemical arsenals, those who destroyed Iraq hiding behind the lie of weapons of mass destruction, and those who withdrew from the international agreement of Iran. I'm speaking here of those who stopped the funding of UNRWA, those who have withdrawn from UNESCO, those who are constantly putting pressure on funding of the United Nations, threatening to withdraw from the WTO. Those who act thus cannot accuse the Syrian Arab Republic, they cannot accuse my country of using chemical weapons. They have no grounds or authority so to do. Particularly when these countries has, and there is proof there is, used weapons, including chemical weapons, against civilians around the world. And this is part of history. I would like to share with you the details of a television report that emerged recently. a journalist who in Turkey met the self-styled victims who fled the alleged chemical attack in Duma in April of 2018. This is an alleged attack. May I stress that point? Alleged by the United States, UK and French governments, and they used that as a pretext for their tripartite aggression against Syria. On the Saturday, the 14th of April 2018, and immediately following that aggression, there was a meeting of the Security Council called. But coming back to my CNN television report, the cards were put on the table by the reporter. In Turkey, hundreds of kilometers from the site of the alleged incident in Duma, the reporter met with alleged victims, and that was just 1 week after the alleged attack. So the CNN journalist said, I will carry out this report, I will go to Duma. So she went first to Turkey, and she stated that on CNN that she felt something chemical, something that stunk in the atmosphere when she was meeting with the refugees of this alleged attack. But this was hundreds of kilometers away, and this is far from professional media behavior. As I'm sure you're aware, President, Syria and its allies are engaged in a ferocious battle against terrorist organizations such as Daesh and Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, the Al-Nusra Front, and others. And I'm pleased to say that we're winning that ferocious war against terrorists, may I repeat. We do not need to use the prohibited chemical weapon to stamp out terrorism, nor would we. As I'm sure you're aware, those who have waged war against international terrorism, and you have all done so in your way, you all know that we cannot give ground to political blackmail and to the threats posed by terrorist organizations, nor can we give way to political blackmail by governments, including the governments of the United States, the United Kingdom of France, who have engaged in prohibited acts in Syria, to wit support for terrorists and terrorist attacks. They have given orders to Al-Nusra Front, to a terrorist group and to its affiliated groups, in particular the White Helmets, given them orders to use chemical weapons to target civilians in Syria, and then to turn around and accuse the Syrian government of having behind these chemical attacks, and use that as a pretext for their own ends in Syria. The war is in Syria. It's not in New York, Washington, London, or Paris. And we have no beef, as it were, with New York, London, Washington, and Paris. We certainly didn't. Our war is against Al-Qaeda, which has been responsible for aggression, which carried out an aggressive attack in September 2001 in New York. It has been responsible for attacks in Paris, in London, in other capitals. That is our enemy, a deserved enemy, Al-Qaeda. And you support and back Al-Qaeda against us. And the reward for all of that is that we are forced to wage this war alone. Ask yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, you who are supposed to be responsible for upholding the Charter and international peace and security, what would cause Syria to use a prohibited weapon, prohibited internationally, a weapon that we don't possess and that will bear no fruit, that will gain us no ground, that will lead to nothing? Why would we do that? This is simply being wielded as a pretext by the three countries aforementioned to carry out aggression. Why are people claiming that chemical weapons are being used? And why is the outlandish claim being made that these chemical weapons are only impacting women and children? For what earthly reason would the Syrian government attack women and children? If we were to use chemical weapons, why wouldn't we use them against the terrorists? Can you give us the times and the sites when these chemical weapons are used in Syria? Why do these governments and terrorist groups, why are they all able to predict what will happen in terms of chemical weapons? We've heard claims aired here again today that chemical weapons attacks are forthcoming. How can you make that claim? How do you know? How do you know that how do you and the terrorist organizations know that that is likely to happen? 56 official letters have gone between ourselves and the OPCW. I beg your pardon, 156 letters, including some letters addressed to you, the Security Council, and the OPCW, explaining the facts of Syria's government action of what we're doing. But nobody reads these letters. Nobody wishes to cooperate with the Syrian government to combat and stamp out terrorism and to prevent the use of chemical weapons. That's what we're seeking to do. And why not? Because certain don't actually wish to resolve the problems in Syria. Certain nations are invested in terrorism. Why are the Security Council and the OPCW still incapable of handling the information provided by Syria in 156 official letters? Most of them provided last year on our handling of chemical elements, and also reporting the use of toxic chemical substances by terrorist organizations targeting civilians. And the terrorist organizations are allowed to get off scot-free, and the army of the Syrian Arab Republic is accused instead. We have many questions. We have detailed them in these letters, and we have no answers thereto. I leave you to draw your own conclusions. Over the last 8 years, the government of these three countries, the US, the UK, and France, have supported terrorists. And that is why these three governments, in their actions, often indirect but often flagrant, are engaged in behind-the-scenes military action against our country. They illegally deploy military forces in parts of the Syrian territory. These countries impede the political process. They have done so in Astana and Geneva and Sochi, and in so doing, they hinder the eradication of terrorism in Idlib. They intend to impose a suffocating economic embargo on the Syrian people, and they seek to strangle the financing of the reconstruction, rehabilitation and reconciliation of Syria. These countries will hamper the return of refugees through their actions, and the return of Syrian migrants as well, who wish to return to live in a dignified, safe and secure and peaceful way in their country, Syria. I would like to say to you all that after the destruction of the two last installations, which is reported by Ms. Nakamitsu, and after the dispatch by the OPCW of a mission to verify the destruction of those remaining chemical weapon production facilities, the last two, all of those are facts. My country has therefore lived up to all of its obligations pertaining to these chemical weapons production facilities. I repeat, the last two have been destroyed, and that has been verified. 2 days ago, we submitted an official letter to the members of the Security Council with specific, accurate and credible information about the preparations underway by terrorist groups in Idlib and in the suburbs of Aleppo, planning the use of toxic chemical substances as part of an attack against civilians. We underscored the fact that this is intended to turn around the territorial gains being made by the Syrian army in these regions. It is very clear, President, by way of conclusion, it is very clear, it is very sad that certain permanent members, including the current presidency of the Security Council, have mixed up the actual purpose of this meeting and the purpose of tomorrow's meeting and confused the two issues. Thank you very much, President.
I thank the representative from Syria, and as we